But it's something that I've been sitting with for a while. This notion of the five wisdom energies, if you like, also correlated with what are called the five Buddha families. And we're going to sort of explore the symbolism of this and the what we could call the phenomenology or the experiential aspect of cultivating intentionally with these amazing sort of embodiments of very profound energies that are part of the Vajrayana tradition. And I'm still exploring these personally. I recently have been doing some Salung work with a teacher in Newton, and that was really where many of these five Buddhas, if you will, become associated with certain breathing practices and mudras and everything. And it's been really interesting to explore that and transform, if you will, into these qualities by focusing on what we call a yidam, or an object of attention and meditation, an object of meditation. So I'll get into all of that in a bit. It's very interesting. It's something that, as I said, is still very generative and exploring, and it's also quite multi-layered. So this is going to be largely an introduction into the themes that we'll be looking at. So, okay, I'm going to read you something from Padmasambhava's text, Natural Liberation, Padmasambhava's teachings on the six bardos. It's a very dense text. It's a beautiful text. For those of us who are really interested in the teachings of the Dzogchen, it really outlines the path quite nicely, the way that he talks about how we can work with some of the things we'll be talking about later, especially things like mantra and energy, breath, visualization, many of the things that are on the path of Vajrayana. So here he is writing in this section, he's talking here about awareness. And he's talking about largely the first of the five wisdoms, or tatata prajna, the pancha, pancha jnana. That's what the five wisdoms are in the Sanskrit. Pancha jnana. Pancha is five, and jnana are knowings or wisdoms. So here Padmasambhava is encouraging us to recognize every moment, recognize the fundamental nature of our mind. And he says that this fundamental nature of the mind is really no different than the mind of the Buddha. And if you fail to recognize the nature of your mind, you will see your own mind as the mind of a sentient being, and it's just a matter of perspective. So part of the theme for tonight is to really see yourself as a living Buddha. To remember that you have this seed, or what we call the Tathagata Garbha, this seed of awakening, already at the heart of who you are. So here's what Padmasambhava tells us. This nature of mind, this alone has been created by no one, but it is self-arising, primordial, and spontaneous. So it is called primordial wisdom. Such awareness as this does not originate from the profound instructions of a spiritual mentor, nor does it originate from your own sharp intelligence. Primordially and originally, the natural character of mind itself exists just like this. But previously it has been obscured by inborn ignorance. So you do not recognize or ascertain it. You're not satisfied, and you don't believe. So until now, you have remained confused. But now, granted to the master of a full abundance, and know your own nature. Know as well your own flaws, and what we call the identifying mind will arise. However, if the mind is empty in the sense of being nothing, or primordially non-existent, who creates the one who wanders in the cycle of existence and who experiences suffering? Once one has become a Buddha, whence arises the primordial wisdom of knowledge, the compassion of mercy, and the enlightened activity of deeds. All those are experienced and created solely by this steadfast awareness that is inseparable clarity, awareness and emptiness. The phrase, the stainless soul eye of primordial wisdom, refers to this alone. The phrases, in an instant, all phenomena are penetrated and held by great wisdom, and, quote unquote, the variety of phenomena with form arise from the mind, refer to this alone. Your awareness, which is present as a great aggregate of light of indivisible clarity and emptiness, is thus unborn and deathless. So it is the Buddha of immutable light. May we all recognize this blessing. So this theme, this many sort of nuanced and multi-layered theme of what we call Panchajnana, or the five wisdoms. We can also think of these qualities as wisdom energies, because they are very activating and they are very consistent with the Vajrayana approach to how we work with everything on the path, including our afflictions. So part of this sort of tantric approach to Buddhism, as found in the Tibetan tradition, primarily in Vajrayana, has us basically not trying to stop or shut down what we call these five poisons or five afflictions. Attachment, aversion, ignorance, pride, and jealousy. These are seen to be the sort of the five afflictions. Sometimes it's three. It's just the first three: greed, hatred, and delusion, or attachment, aversion, and ignorance. And the whole point here on this path of Buddhist Tantra isn't to eradicate something that is embedded within our samsaric ego cherishing. And when I say eradicate, that brings with it kind of a force, a needfulness, if you will, to be free, which on its own can be a wholesome desire, a chanda, a desire, something that is perhaps wholesome. But what is wholesome about it isn't the need to be free, so that we engage in forcibly removing things, but rather the we call that the metabolizing of these things for the purpose of wisdom. And this is one of the things that maybe differentiates Vajrayana from some of the other paths of Lamrim and other things, where you're basically practicing within the cosmology of many lifetimes. And in Vajrayana, we're being challenged here with a kind of renunciation that is inclusive. Isn't that an interesting thought? That by renunciating the things that we cling to or that we are averse to altogether, which is another form of clinging, we actually stand a better chance within one lifetime to metabolize the woundedness, the painfulness, into wisdom. This is the point. And so, towards that end, we begin working with what we can call psychophysiological energies behind these afflictions. And the energy of a particular affliction, or in its neutral state, that quality can be used either to further our afflictions. So, for example, I may get really agitated or frustrated, and that leads to anger. And yet, there is a seed of potentiality within that experience. And it's not a destructive one. Anger, if we're using anger as an example, anger is a destructive force. It can be, but it can also be a generative and an energizing power. And so the point here is that that seed of energy within the anger, when it is used to metabolize that energy into awakening, can either be an affliction or it can be liberating. Yeah. And so these 5 Buddhas that are associated with wholesome states of awareness, these kind of awarenesses that are imbued with the wisdom, as opposed to taking that same energy and falling into an afflictive state, is now used to cultivate something extraordinary and generative, a quality of mind that is already existing, as exemplified by one of these 5 Buddha families. And it's interesting because there are sort of these 5 Buddhas that are affiliated with these 5 states, these 5 lineages, if you will. And yet each family, if you will, has many other beings associated with them, depending on the characteristics that we embody in a given moment. So this is why I say it's multi-layered, it's very nuanced, and it's up to, often traditionally, it's up to the master to say, okay, we're going to have you work with the Buddha Akshobhya, or the Buddha of pristine awareness. And the Bodhisattva form is XYZ, and so we're going to kind of move on that continuum towards one of the other members of that Buddha family under Akshobhya. So if you can think of it as 5 families kind of that are all neighbors to each other, and within each house there are more family members. So and so we have these 5 Buddha families, if you will, that are extraordinarily generative, they serve as what we call a yidam. Yidam is Y-I-D-A-M. And yidam is an object of our concentrative attention, perhaps through a deep devotional practice. So let's say that Amitabha is kind of our yidam, and we are chanting and we are practicing visualizing the Buddha Amitabha, the Buddha of infinite, boundless light, sort of the primordial Buddha in some respects. Then we're actually using that as a way to become the Buddha Amitabha in some respects. And what we're really doing is awakening that quality of radiance, of luminosity at the heart of our own Buddha nature. So this is true for all of these Buddha families. And each Buddha, so each of these Buddhas is male, and yet each has a female counterpart. And this is where I think it gets very interesting, is that it's not just about the male incarnation or the male representation of these energies, but that it is what we could call the divine female that is the heart of the wisdom, the insight, the subtle quality of wisdom that helps the male energy know what to do. Now, this really isn't about gender. when we're talking about this kind of thing. We're not talking about our roles as men and women in the ordinary state and all of that. And maybe it's helpful. And if it is, then absolutely, by all means. But what we're talking about are energies we have both sides of within us. Yeah. And so whereas wisdom and the capacity for wisdom is seen through the lens of the female, this deep, deep insight, penetrative insight is female. The male side is seen to be the active, energizing principle that actually makes it happen. And so the only way that can happen is if the male side is skillful. Therefore, the male part, the energetic part, also represents skillful means. And this is why wisdom energy, this compound term with a hyphen, is the same thing as saying female, male, insight, skillfulness. Does that make sense? That they come as a set, but they don't just come as a set. They come as a union. And so in Vajrayana, even though on a conventional level, in a conceptual way, we are making sense out of how to work with these energies in what appears to be this kind of gendered framework. The ultimate goal here is full union. This is the integration, which is sometimes depicted in tankas or in images as yabyum, which is where the male and the female deities are engaged, embraced in sexual activity, and that only by being together in this union can they really realize a fullness of unity, of wholeness together. And they need each other for this. So we're really talking about this empowered female energy, feminine energy, however we want to sort of call this, that is put into action by the male principle. It's activated. Now, this is slightly different than the Hindu view that says that Purusha, so if we go into the ancient Vedas, this notion of the divine consciousness being male, this Purusha, this figure of Purusha, and Prakriti or nature is the feminine. And it is out of the nature that what we call Shakti, or the divine energy of awakening, of pristine, vibrating at a high rate of vibration, is that active principle that leads to our awakening. So it's interesting, having also studied in the yoga tradition and in Vedanta, for me, when I was learning about these, I thought, well, this is interesting. It's almost like a reversal, but actually it isn't. Because we're talking about a continuum here. We're not talking about this versus that. It's a continuum of beings or of qualities that really go from subtle to gross. And in this way, the light of wisdom that comes with the consort or with the partner, the female partner, this is why she enables this wisdom to be applied skillfully and for us to practice in skillful ways, so that by the time we reach the fifth quality, the fifth wisdom of accomplishment, of awareness that leads to actual accomplishment with altruistic motivation. So here we're working with these various energies. It's very interesting, and yet we're doing it within our own subtle body. And we're connecting with that which is also beyond us, this kind of more universal quality. Just like we did in our meditation, I led you through this sort of very simple, hopefully it was simple, practice of inside the space within is no different than the space without. This sense of unifying, of becoming transparent. And this is a way to begin this quality of unifying with these deities, not just within our own minds, but as they exist out in the Dharmadhatu, in the Buddha field. So Anyway, this is the landscape for these five wisdom energies. And the first one that we're looking at this evening is basically considered the primordial Buddha field, the energy of Dharmadhatu, or basically the entire existence, the entire cosmology. In fact, some people call this Buddha the cosmic Buddha. And sometimes he's embodied by Vairocana. So the way that I learned this, Vairocana is this embodiment, the Buddha Vairocana, the embodiment of Dharmakaya, or of the body of consciousness and truth that we receive from the Buddha through the teachings. And it is this sort of ground of primordial awareness, this vibration of allness, if you will, that is largely what our practice is seeking to return us back to, this cosmic quality of consciousness. Now, it seems pretty grand, right? This seems like, wow, okay, so how do I do this? Well, first of all, we have to understand kind of who is this primordial Buddha field, or rather, what does this represent? And it wasn't long ago that we did a teaching on the Dharmadhatu here on Sunday night, and I think the video is up on the YouTube channel. So I'm not going to sort of repeat all of that, but this notion that we are integrally part of this interdependent field of consciousness, of causes and conditions arising independence upon each other, and then not evaporating, but simply changing into other causes and conditions in line with the tendencies that are at the heart of those causes and conditions, and so on and so forth. And that we're not separate from that which is out there in space or in the world, but that everything is this brightly shining mind of the Buddha field, when we can see it, when we can really notice it and receive it, when the mind is quiet and we have really clear awareness. And so in this way, this first of the five Buddhas is this primordial Buddha that represents what we call shunyata, or emptiness. This is another state within this this ground of being that is part of Vairocana. Now, Vairocana also, I'm going to pull out this reference here. Part of the families, so who is Vairocana's partner in this? By the way, he is also sometimes called the illuminator, the one who illuminates, which sounds suspiciously like Amitabha Buddha. And there are some Tibetan traditions that sort of mix up the order a bit. So we may have, the first one is Akshobhya Buddha, the second one is Amitabha, and so on. In the tradition that I learned, Vairocana is first. And if you Wikipedia this, you'll probably find this also to be true. Vairocana also, within his family, has a wrathful side. And Vajradhara, the thunderbolt holder. I love these names. These are very significant for the qualities that we're talking about. Or Yamantaka, who is a female wrathful deity. As we talked about earlier, this transmutation of anger into wholesome, clear witness. Yamantaka does that. She helps us to have fierce compassion, fierce wisdom. So the alternative here is destructive anger. And if we can, the way that I often think about practicing this is to recognize the distinction between the rawness of the feeling, the rawness of the affliction, and the narrative that keeps that affliction part of suffering. this is where, on a practical level, if we're buying into the story, the cognitive narrative, the rationale for the anger that is rooted in sort of self-clinging or protection or fear or the woundedness, all of those things are traumas. Understandably, there is no judgment here at all. And yet we have a choice. Let's say that we begin to practice with Vairocana. And so Vairocana in this case is sort of the one who brings us illumination in attachment. So we can see very, very clearly kind of the pitfalls of clinging and begin to relinquish, to renounce basically that which we're clinging to and recognize emptiness because we're part of the Dharmadhatu. His consort here is Akashadatishvari. Akashadatishvari. And she is this, what this term means is the womb of infinite space. The womb of infinite space. Infinite space here allows the illuminative quality of Vairocana to be unhindered. Light travels far with nothing in the way. And she is that source of wisdom, the wisdom source here that helps us feel that sense of open spaciousness. So we may feel at once this sense of primordial luminosity, what in some traditions is called Rigpa in Tibetan. But she is the spacious quality that allows that luminosity to be boundless. So we're reminded that these two qualities of emptiness and luminosity in Dzogchen are the same. They are indivisible. Ultimately, when the mind is still, when we are meditating on the source of awareness itself, and we're able to relinquish kind of all of the busyness, and we can feel that unitary quality between this sense of brightness of mind and spaciousness of mind. So we're talking about esoteric teachings here, right? And I don't expect that everybody will go, okay, we had this, hour and a half together, we did this, now I can go off and I can practice these 5 wisdom energies. This is, as I mentioned before, this is an introduction to the ideas. And if you want to practice these intentionally and consistently, it's important to find a teacher to do that with. I would also mention the other Buddha families here. The second one, so the first one we're looking at here is Vairocana, this Primordia, wouldn't that be a cool name of a place, Primordia? This primordial energy, the cosmic Buddha, if you will. Vairocana, sometimes it's Vajrasattva. Sometimes Akshobhya comes first. But in this framework, the second one is Akshobhya. Akshobhya, the Buddha of pristine awareness. And we'll talk about this a little more next time. But here, the quality of awareness is mirror-like. Mind becomes mirror-like, reflecting things as they are. And seeing the unity between that which is perceived, that which is being reflected, and the source of the reflecting itself. And this can sound a little bit like the mind-only school of Buddhism. And it kind of is. It's an important part. It's an important quality of awareness. Then the third one is non-discriminative awareness. Basically, equanimity, equality, a state of awareness that isn't seeing difference, that isn't seeing this versus that, this is good, this is bad. It's basically non-dual. And this is embodied by Ratnasambhava. So Ratnasambhava is the Buddha here of this equality of mind or evenness, this sense of no preference, and yet remaining highly engaged. The fourth then becomes, in this framework, Amitabha Buddha, or infinite radiance, the Buddha of infinite light. Sometimes Amitayus, the Buddha of longevity, of profound well-being. And here, true to the nature of Amitabha Buddha, the quality of awareness here is penetrative knowledge, insight. It is the clarity, the pristine clarity that brings discerning awareness. So here, wisdom is this quality of seeing things as they are in their specificity, in the nature in which they are. So we start being able to see, because of the light of awareness and of our insight. Sometimes it's called investigative awareness. We're able to begin to know, to have the mind of a Buddha, to know the difference between things and see clearly what is what. We might also call this intuitive awareness, where we may be talking to one person and see their nature, and then talk to another person and we'll get insights into what's going on with them. When we do training for chaplaincy students, we really try to help people to relinquish their own projections into the patient that they might be visiting in a hospital, and just really try to attune themselves to what is going on with the other person, to see what is really the issue here. What am I sensing? What am I feeling? What am I picking up through intuition? But this quality of Amitabha Buddha goes much beyond that. Now, in some traditions, Amitabha is the second of these 5 Buddha families. And in some traditions, Amitabha Buddha is fundamentally that primordial source, that Buddha field that brings all else into being, including compassion, the Bodhisattva of compassion, and so on. So the point isn't so much what's the correct order and who wins the prize for being the primordial Buddha, but rather it's what can we learn and what can we gain from each of these qualities. And then we arrive at the 5th one, Amoghasiddhi, the Buddha Amoghasiddhi, who is the Buddha of action and accomplishment through wisdom. And the feminine aspect of Amoghasiddhi is Green Tara. And she has her wisdom of being kind of the one who is ready to act out of sheer compassion, out of sheer responsiveness to suffering, that allows for Amoghasiddhi's, the energy of Amoghasiddhi, to actually get somewhere, to do something productive skillfully. So this is also the Buddha of skillful means. The active accomplishment through skillful means, through appropriate response based on what you're encountering. And so it's Green Tara. This is one of her many roles, in addition to being a protector, to being a refuge for us when we're suffering, and so on. She's also the one that facilitates action. So we'll be exploring the rest of these in the coming weeks. But for now, I think it's interesting to associate, if you will, kind of associate equality to how do we experience kind of this primordial quality of being within the brightness of this beautiful world that we live in. Today was a gorgeous day here in New England. The sun was out. I know some of you have had profound heat. There's been a lot going on. And Pilar, I hope where you are, it's cooled down a bit this week. No? A little? Okay. Yeah. Well, anyway, part of this is also the reminder of this, what we call the Dharmadhatu, this Buddha field that we are all part of, that we're not just practicing alone within, on our cushion, within our refuge, but that we are really cultivating a way to reconnect when we are cultivating on Vairocana, the cosmic Buddha, to reconnect with this amazing reality of the universe, of the cosmos, of our world, of our environment, and of the space that we're inhabiting, that it is vibrant. And remembering this when you watch the news or you start sort of getting pulled into the narratives of human consciousness that so often want to colonize our minds and spur us into quick action or impulsivity or joining. But to remember all of this is happening within a container. And the larger container that we are part of, really, it's not about those things. It doesn't mean we don't get involved and we don't vote and have opinions and such, and really wish for the best outcome of whatever election is coming up. But it's also a recognition all of this is playing out within this much more spacious, expansive Buddha field. Let's not forget our ontology, that we are beings that are being not just in human consciousness, but in cosmic consciousness. That this is what this Buddha mind, this quality of awareness, is really seeking for us to understand and not waver from it too much. I think, to speak to, and you didn't ask this as a question, but it is an interesting thing. I think, if you're with a client that is really having issues with rage and needs to be angry, I think that part of it is it's okay to act it out. I had a therapist over 25 years ago who advocated, she had a tennis racket, one of those old wooden rackets. She was 94 when she was my therapist, amazing woman. And she would beat the heck out of a pillow with it. She didn't do it to imprint the narrative. She did it to get that energy out of her body so she could be free. Because it needed a place to go. This is how she always put it. That energy has to go somewhere. You can't just subjugate it or bypass. You can breathe, you can settle, but there's still an imprint, a trigger there. Yeah. And so it's kind of twofold. One is it's okay to get it out. So for some people, it's going on a vigorous walk, perhaps. But I think, from a karmic standpoint, if the action of expressing anger reinforces the narrative, that's a problem. Because, it just intensifies the belief system that goes with that narrative.
Well, it's just being stuck in samsara.
Exactly.
Like that. It's like not really a problem, except that that's a problem. Like you can do it
Right.
as much as you want. Yeah. Yeah.
And so instead, if you say, well, I recognize I have all of this intensity, this anger in me, I'm going to go on a vigorous bike ride and I'm going to come home and sit. Like, you're actually helping your body to metabolize it a bit, but it's the rumination. That's the second arrow. That's the suffering that the Buddha talks about. And what is being imprinted when we work with the anger. And so it can't just be, let's get it out and forget about it. But let's look at the roots.
Well, and also the question of whether what degree of expression is necessary. Like for me, I need more of the physical, visceral. It's just my nature. It's part of my healing process. But for some people, just naming something is enough to feel the energy move and release, like to give it. It's an interesting, subtle process for people to find their way.
And that's the endeavor of the Vajrayana path, is to ask, where is the wisdom in your anger? Where is the illusion? Where is the wisdom? Then once you can sort that out, you can begin to work with wholesome states. Whether it's kindness or compassion, meditation or tonglen, where you open your heart again and you reconnect with others who feel this feeling. But if you're doing a meditation on one of these five Buddhas, or the wrathful, and this is why each one has a wrathful version. I think Yamantaka is the female wrathful being who is a manifestation of the wrathful manifestation of Manjushri, I believe, the Bodhisattva of wisdom. And you may actually be able to make sense out of the rage, the anger, as represented by Yamantaka, because it's using it, it's useful, it's power, it's empowerment. And I think in particular for anybody who's been violated or traumatized or assaulted, sexually assaulted in that way, that empowerment is so critical. And getting angry is important. It's part of Judith Herman's second stage of trauma recovery. It's really getting mad in an appropriate way to the person who committed the violation. Without that, you remain really stuck. And then you can move to her third stage, which is reconnection, reintegration, integrating that experience into your awareness and moving forward. And it's more complex than that, I know, but anyway, yeah. How do we, where's the wisdom in the emotion, whatever it is?
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Hey, Chris.
Ken. Yes. Hello, my friend. How are you?
I'm fine.
Good.
It might promote further understanding too, to know that the Vajrayana shrine says a lot about this phenomenon of the five Buddha families. The shrine is a mandala plate with 5 heaps of rice on it, one in the middle and one at each of the cardinal points.
Mm-hmm.
And diagonally straddling those 5 heaps is a metal vajra.
Mm-hmm.
And each of the heaps represents one of the 5 Buddha families, which can manifest either in its neurotic form or its enlightened form.
Mm-hmm.
Each of the energies has a neurotic aspect and an enlightened aspect, and the Vajra is meant to symbolize the invoking of one's immutable Vajra awareness to the manifestation of that energy, to transmute that energy from a neurotic form into an enlightened form. And it's also interesting to note too that each of those 5 heaps has a corresponding skanda, the 5 skandhas. So it all kind of fits together in that unified mandala.
Exactly, and I'm glad you brought that up. Ken is very knowledgeable about these things. My friend, you've practiced for many years, so thank you for bringing your wisdom into this as well.
Oh, my pleasure.
And yeah, often you'll see on Tanka, I was talking to Schwein about this earlier, you'll see one of the main Buddhas in the center of the mandala, and then the other 4 around the side, but they will alternate. That sometimes it may be Akshobhya that's in the middle. It could be Amitabha. It could be one of the other Buddhas. It could be Ratnasambhava, depending on what is that quality of awareness, or that, as you put it, the quality of awakening, of enlightenment, that is really being, that one is really needing to practice. And so that's the one that will be at the center, supported by the others. The thing I didn't mention about this first Buddha family, or this first Buddha, Vairocana, is that he is also the basis upon which all the other Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and Dakinis arise. Like, this is he is the one that provides the foundation for all the others. Now, in some cases, it's Amitabha Buddha, who is the source. And so again, these things can depend on tradition and lineage. So we'll often see that first one in the middle, in the center, but it can vary. And there are, as I said, there are also dakinis that are part of these families, and these are sort of female beings that are sort of wrathful beings. Sometimes they're very playful, and they're there to sort of symbolize also an approach to dealing with adversity and to transmuting these things from, as you put it, neurotic states into enlightened states, or afflictive states. So yeah.
But it's interesting because it's the invoking of one's true nature, one's Vajra nature, indestructible awareness, that by invoking that transmutes the crude energies into the subtle energies of awakeness. In other words, each of those energies becomes a form, or is at root a form of awareness itself.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, and we are in deeper water here. We are in slightly more esoteric, not even slightly more, it is more of an esoteric landscape that we're in, that skillfully seeks to use these different states that are already part of who we are to cultivate that which is beyond all these conventional forms that we practice in. So there are skillful means. It doesn't mean that there is really no Vairocana or primordial Buddha out there. It just means that we are accessing these qualities of awareness and cultivating them intentionally to be free from samsara. Yeah.